Presidio Trust Fund, $15 million.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 381, offered by Mr. Reed of New York.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today in support of my amendment seeking to rescind $15 million of funds out of this continuing resolution. As I've listened to the debate here this evening and yesterday and over the last few days, as a freshman member of Congress, I've come to a realization that part of the problem is that many members of this esteemed body look at our spending in terms of it's a relatively small amount of money. It's a small sum. But we're talking about millions of dollars. We're talking about $15 million in this situation. Now, I propose this amendment without any disrespect to any member of this House, but I propose it in a time when we face a national crisis that goes to our very existence for generations to come, a nation that won't be here for our children and our grandchildren. And when I look at the Presidio Trust Fund and I look at the park, and it's a great park, I concede that point, but the plan for the park was to be self-sufficient. And upon researching and going through page by page of this budget and doing the hard work, my staff and I have uncovered that this park is at the point where it can be self-sufficient on its own. They have received grants of $80,000 from the Cowell Foundation for 3 projects. They have a $15 million gift from the private sector from Evelyn and Walter Haas, Jr. Lucas Arts, Video Games and Industrial Light and Magic are leasing portions of the park, and it's a private revenue stream. This is a success story. And at this point, it's time for us to put all our cards on the table and say, now that you are standing on your own 2 feet, when we face this fiscal crisis, this government now has to make a responsible decision. And to me, that responsible decision is to allow the park to stand on its own 2 feet. It has shown plenty of ability to do that and save the children and grandchildren so that we can have a nation that they can be proud of and can have a nation that they can live in, because that's the point that we are in our nation's history. So I stand today and ask your support for this amendment. I think it is the responsible action to do, and I applaud this process because this process is being conducted in the open and through a vigorous debate. And that's what the American people have called upon us to do. No line of our spending shall be left under stones. We shall uncover each stone, and I urge all my fellow members to support this amendment. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Madam Chair, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And I rise in strong opposition to this amendment that would eliminate funding for the Presidio Trust. The Presidio was in continuous use as a military post from 1776 until 1994. An Army installation, the post was closed in 1994 as part of the BRAC process and transferred to the National Park Service. In 1996, Congress established the Presidio Trust to govern this unique national park site and to ensure its preservation by making it financially self-sustaining. And that's exactly what has happened. Over the past 12 years, appropriations as a percentage of the overall trust budget have been reduced from over 95% federal funding in fiscal year 1998 to less than 20% in fiscal year 2010. The current ratio of private investment in the Presidio to federal appropriations is already greater than 4-to-1. Appropriations, though, are authorized through fiscal year 2012. That was the deal. After 2012, the trust itself, by itself alone, is responsible for long-term operations and maintenance of the Presidio. Since it took over management of the Presidio in 1998, the trust has rehabilitated and leased 97% of the Presidio's housing units and rehabilitated 75% of the Presidio's 433 very historic buildings. I've been there. I've seen it. It's phenomenal what the trust has accomplished. Eliminating funds just 1 year short of its goal violates the spirit of the 1996 law, and it undermines the Trust's ability to achieve self-sufficiency. This would result in higher future obligations, as the federal government might have to assume full responsibility to maintain the historic properties. It also sends a terrible signal to communities across the country that may also have innovative solutions in partnering with the federal government. They're time controlled. In other words, it's not forever, but they say for a certain period of time, if you'll partner with us, we'll take this responsibility off your hands. The $23 million appropriated for the trust in fiscal year 2010 has created 860 jobs. Federal appropriations in this current fiscal year will help expedite rehabilitation of historic buildings and take advantage of favorable construction costs that exist today. At a recent oversight hearing, the members of our Appropriations Subcommittee received assurances that the Trust will accomplish its financial stewardship and public use goals. That was the deal. They said, we'll meet our part of the deal, assuming that the federal government will meet its obligation. As one of the nation's oldest and most important military posts, the Trust has had some unique, extraordinary challenges since the Defense Department closed out its installations. But the Trust is well on its way toward meeting its legislative objectives. It should not be undermined by this amendment. This has worked well. It's an example for the rest of the country. Let it serve as an example. 1 more year to go, and then it will be off our books. The Trust will take over responsibility, and we will point out that this is the way to do it, in partnership, where we will not be perpetually responsible, but in fact the private sector will come in, let the market work, and have a national gem, really, a national asset for everyone to visit and appreciate and learn from. So, Madam Chair, I'll yield the balance of my time, but strongly urge opposition to this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose the gentleman from Idaho
Madam Chairwoman, I move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in concurrence with the comments of my ranking member from Virginia. Funding for the Presidio in this CR is $8.2 million below the FY10 enacted level and $7 million below the FY08 level. When the government closed down the Presidio Army Base in 1994, it was transferred to the National Park Service as part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. It could have been turned over to the National Park Service and run as a historic park, but that would have cost tens of millions of dollars per year to the taxpayers. Instead, Congress devised a unique management and funding model by creating the Presidio Trust to preserve the Presidio and help it become financially self-sufficient. The Trust manages 80% of the Presidio lands, including most of the buildings and the infrastructure. The Park Service manages the remaining 20%, including the coastal areas of the Presidio. The Presidio Trust receives federal appropriations that are diminishing each year and, as was mentioned, will cease at the end of FY12. And when it becomes self-sufficient. This truly is a model of how we can do these things where they will become self-sufficient and off the roll of the taxpayer. But our part of this is we have to keep our end of the deal. And so through FY012, we need to make sure that we keep our word on what was agreed on in 1996 and let this Presidio Trust take over and become self-sufficient at the end of the next fiscal year. So I rise in opposition to this amendment and would encourage my colleagues to vote against it.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from New York.
Yes, Chairman. I ask for a roll call vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York will be postponed. Read.